Hi, I'm Michelle. Welcome back to Finally Revealed. Thanks for watching. Today I want to talk about absentee voting and some other types of voting that we have in the U.S. First of all, for the presidential election that's coming up in 2016, we have 3 states where all of the voting is by mail. So there's no issue with absentee voting because you can go get your ballot and send it in on your schedule. Those 3 states where voting is only by mail are Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. So absentee voting is not an issue. So go get your ballots whenever it's time to go and send those in. Now, for the rest of the states and the District of Columbia, we have 47 states and then the District of Columbia. They all allow absentee voting in some fashion, meaning it's available for people who cannot physically go to the polling place during the hours, which are generally 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but they can vary. But generally those are the hours. And 27 states and the District of Columbia do not care why you can't be there in person. They allow unrestricted absentee voting. So if you're not available to go to the polls on that day, then get your absentee ballot and send it in. Generally speaking, those states also allow advance voting, so that alleviates the need for absentee also. Now, let's talk about the others. There are 20 states where you are allowed to vote absentee ballot. However, you need a reason. The reasons, some of them are a lot of possibilities, some of them are a few possibilities, and I don't have the time to go through all of those right now, but I'm going to tell you the general reasons. There's about 7 general reasons that you can have for needing to vote absentee, and if you fit in one of these categories, then most likely these 20 states will accommodate you, but you should check to be sure. Okay, the reasons that are allowed generally for absentee voting are that you're not going to be in your county on election day. That also can fall under the emergency category, and some states have an emergency category, but you have to be out of the county and you won't be there all day, so you should qualify in certain states for absentee voting. Also, illness is an exemption. Physical disability is another one, as is a prolonged absence. So if you are in the military, you're overseas. If you're in college, you're away from home. Or you're working overseas in private employment, then you can vote absentee. If you are required to work during the polling hours, then you can apply for absentee voting. For religious observance, some states allow that as a reason. And then finally, if you are in jail or prison. Now, it's got to be on a charge that's not a felony, because as we know, if you are convicted of a felony, one of your penalties is you lose the right to vote. So it doesn't apply to them. So those are the reasons for being able to qualify for absentee ballots. And now I'm going to give you the deadlines for those 20 states where you have to give a reason. You also have to do an application for most of them. Some of them do not have a deadline for an application, but they have a deadline for turning in the ballot. So these are not in alphabetical order, I'm sorry. So here are the 20 states where you need a reason to qualify for absentee voting, and there's an application process on most of them. You ready? Texas, 7 to 30 days before the election, you can apply to absentee vote. Alabama, the deadline is 5 days before the election, so get it in there before 5 days. Mississippi, there's no time to apply for absentee voting, but the ballot must be received by 5 o'clock the day before the election. So contact your local office in Mississippi to apply to be an absentee voter if it applies. Arkansas, if you are sending in your application, it's got to be there 7 days before the election. If you're doing it in person, it can be up to the day before the election. You can just walk into your election office, apply for the absentee, and get the ballot. Missouri, it's 5 o'clock the Wednesday before the election is the deadline for applying for absentee voting. Louisiana, you must submit an application for absentee voting between 4 and 60 days before the election. Tennessee, you must submit your application for absentee voting between 7 and 90 days before the election. Like I said, a lot of these time limits are running now, so if this applies to you, don't wait. Go ahead and get your application and get it in there. Kentucky, you have it up until 7 days before the election to apply for absentee voting. Indiana, you have 8 days before the election as your deadline for absentee voting. For Michigan, your deadline is 2 o'clock the Saturday before the election to apply for absentee voting. For Pennsylvania, you have until 5 o'clock the Tuesday before the election to apply for absentee voting, and then you have Friday before the election as your deadline to get the ballot back. So you can do it all the way up until Tuesday before, but the latest you can do it in Pennsylvania is the Tuesday before the election, which is a week before. But then you only have a couple of days to get that ballot back, so plan ahead. For New York, you have 7 days to apply, up until 7 days before the election to apply for an absentee ballot. And if you're going to do it in person in New York, you can do the application up until 1 day before. West Virginia, the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is 60 days before the election. So your deadline has already passed, I'm sorry, by the time this video has aired, if you are in West Virginia, because 60 days would be, we're within 60 days. So Virginia, the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is 5 p.m. on Tuesday before the election. For South Carolina, your deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is 5 o'clock on the 4th day before the election. Okay, that would be Friday before, get it done before Friday before the election if you're in South Carolina. Connecticut, there's no deadline to apply for an absentee ballot. However, the ballot has to be back the day before the election if you're submitting it in person, or it has to be received by election day if you're mailing it. Rhode Island, the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is 21 days before the election. Massachusetts, you have until noon on the day before the election to apply for absentee. New Hampshire, there is no deadline, but the ballot has to be back if you're delivering it in person by 5 o'clock the day before the election, or if by mail, then it has to be received by 5 o'clock on election day. And Delaware, you have 4 days before the election to get your application for absentee ballot processed. So I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know. And if it was, share it with someone who may need this information. Like I said, the time limits are running. So Colorado, Oregon, Washington, you don't have to worry about it because all of their voting is by mail. So you don't have to worry about where you're going to be on election day. Just get your ballot and get it in. But these 20 states, if you have one of the excuses that applies and you need to go through the process, you need to get going. Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, South Carolina, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Delaware. I hope this was helpful to you. If you want to look around, check out our playlist for our other videos. And it was great talking to you, and I really appreciate you coming by the channel. Give us a thumbs up if this was helpful, and subscribe to see our later videos. I'll see you next time. Go vote.